I wanted to talk to you about your new book. Tell us why you felt you had to write a book about Sharia law in Britain.
It's actually based, the reason is very personal. It has to do with a discussion that was taking place in Switzerland, where a professor was suggesting the introduction of some aspect of Islamic law in the legal process of Switzerland. But I have to also to mention that he was saying we have to do it in a way that respects human rights. It's very important to say that. And I just finished at that time field work in different Arab countries and was faced with the reality of legal pluralism and Islamic law, the effects, how it reflects on the lives of women. So you can imagine me coming, a women's rights activist, a scholar, and coming with this background, and someone is telling me in the name of your religion, it would be good if we introduce this type of law. And the more I researched, the more I realized that it's an expression of a paradigm of thinking that seems to be dominant in post-colonial and post-modern academic circles. And given the fact that many were basically using Britain as a good example, I thought it would be wise to investigate this example. And when I did that, I just realized it's, with all due respect, the road to hell is paved with good intentions in this respect.
You talk about these good intentions and the fact that the consequence of these good intentions are really bad. What are some of the consequences when you talk about real lived experience of women who are facing these laws?
The main argument of the book is basically, this is not a theoretical argument. This is not a theoretic discussion that you can basically talk about and you think life is good with this. We can basically discuss it. The main argument is that you have two aspects to consider, context and consequences. And when you look at the consequences, you realize that you are asking for the legitimization of systematic discrimination against women. What are we asking for? Which law we would like to introduce? It's a law that is based on a corpus of legal opinions that were designed and written in a period between the 7th and the 10th century. And they inherently reflect the historical period, but also the perception of women at that time. And that you see it in the way that Islamic law today looks to women. It looks to women in terms of as perpetual minors, as people in need of protection of a guardian. It doesn't look, it certainly treats women as not separate from her husband. There's a hierarchy in family life, family structures. She owes her husband obedience. Of course, he has to support her financially, but the two are basically intrinsic, the obedience. And from this perspective, with all due respect, you have a law that respects man and woman as equal before the law, and you're asking me right now in the name of a very strange concept of minority rights to introduce a law that inherently discriminates against me, and you think you're protecting my religious identity with that? You're not. You're discriminating against me.
What do you say to people, though, who say that how can people's religious rights be respected if you don't allow for Sharia courts? What do you say to people who say, how can you respect religious rights if you don't acknowledge and implement religious courts?
I believe that this is an abuse of the concept of freedom of religion. I think it's an abuse. Because please, let's just consider the laws that were here dominant whether in England or in Switzerland or in the United States, family laws that were discriminating against women because of the way they were inspired by religious worldviews. Today, these laws went away. They were secularized and reformed in a way that integrate the concept of gender equality and gender justice. Similarly, if we look at Islam, it's not a critique against my religion, Islam, not at all. It's a critique against a legal dimension that discriminates against women, and it's a legal dimension that belongs to another historical period. And from this perspective, this is not respect for freedom of religion, this is discrimination against women and children within, because children are affected as well, within Muslim communities. And while I have to repeat this again and again and again, freedom of religion is absolute, yes, but how you manifest this religion is not. And it's very important to, if you are going to violate women's rights or human rights, children's rights, LGBT rights in the name of religion, then with all due respect, that cannot be accepted. That cannot be accepted.
You talk about the reasons why we have come to this point where we have these courts. What are some of those reasons?
Well, it's, the book has different dimension, and I talked about the problematic aspect. There are certain policies that were taken and reflected directly on the type, on the system that we're having today. That said, at the same time, there's a problematic concept of multiculturalism connected to a politics of difference, because multiculturalism, as I understand it, is a system where we basically it's accepting each other, cherishing our heritage, with that. Regardless of gender, race, religion, what happened, however, one took this concept and put it in a context where basically, instead of cherishing what brings us together, we cherish what separates us, what makes us different. And by focusing on what makes us different, groups became more or less, this is like an individual was defined by his group identities, put into boxes. And while put in these boxes, you don't have multiculturalism here in Switzerland, you have monoculturalism. And I said that in the book. Because it's like close communities, touching each other, barely knowing each other, and at the same time suspicious of each other. That's not multiculturalism as I understand it. That's not it. So you see, there are different reasons. There's a sick tendency by some intellectuals to fall for the arguments of Islamists who are promoting identity politics, who are promoting the idea that there is something called one Islam, one religious Islamic identity. We have one group, and this group has demands. It's Islamists who are demanding that. They are the loudest. They shout well, and they have also very intelligent strategies in terms of influencing decision-making processes here. And from this perspective, and I mentioned that also in the book, that until 2007, 2005, the speaking partner of the British government when it comes to the Muslim was the British Muslim Council, you know. And then there was a survey conducted by a think tank which showed that only 6% of Muslims think that this organization represents them. 6%! And you've been talking with them as their partner in your discussion about Islam for the last 3 decades, you know, or since they were created in the 90s, and shows you that something fundamentally wrong was done here.
What do you say to people who say it's anti-Muslim to focus on Sharia law? Anti-Muslim?
No, I don't think it's anti-Muslim at all. It's like I always say that I'm talking from within. And at the same time, I think we have every right to criticize laws when they are discriminatory, regardless of their sources. And from this perspective, this is a human rights struggle. And it's a human rights struggle that touches on laws that can infringe on our human rights and individual freedom. And from this perspective, I would appreciate, and I think I talked about that also within the book, I would appreciate very much if we look at the discourses, the struggles that are taking place within Islamic countries. And as you said, Karima Bannoun, in her marvelous book, Your Fatwa Does Not Apply to Me, she put it, and she said that the struggle against Islamism is the most neglected struggle in the fight for human rights, because one realizes this is a fight, in fact, against an ideology that's mainstreaming the idea that Sharia is something religiously sanctioned and necessary, and Sharia is something that is very inherently part of our religious identity. This is Islamist discourse, Islamist ideology. And what we are saying, we are deconstructing their argument and telling and saying, as a Muslim, I'm talking here, I can criticize these laws because I understand it's a process in all religions, you know. And with that, I'm not getting out of my faith. All I'm saying that these laws are discriminatory. They belong to a different historical period. Legal opinions, we can change that. We can change it.
You talked a lot about the fact that we need to move beyond all these differences and barriers and boundaries, look at each other as citizens and humans, first and foremost. And you had a plea at the conference and in your book about how things can change for the better. Tell us about that.
Yes, I believe it's about time that we have a different paradigm. We need a paradigm shift, you know, one that doesn't put us in boxes, in religious boxes, one that treats us as individuals, as humans, you know, that we go beyond these religious boundaries, these identity boundaries, and at the same time expect. There are rules of the games, in my opinion, and these rules of the games should be grounded on principles of human rights, on equality, on gender justice, you know. And from this perspective, we have to respect these rules as something applicable for everybody, across all religious identities. You cannot come to me and tell me in the name of my religion I'm going to beat my wife, or I'm going to have 4 wives, or I'm going to marry off my daughter at the when she's 9 years old because I think she's fit, she got her period. So from this perspective, we have to go beyond these identity discourses, but at the same time work together. Understand that we are all in this together. Whether we like it or not, we are all in this together. And we have a task here to defend the values and norms that are dear to us, you know. I don't look at this as British values, Swiss values. I see them as universal values. Universal values. that brings us all together, and they are there to protect us. That's the main thing. They protect us as humans.
Thank you.
Welcome.